Welcome back to Renaissance Bookbinding. Today we are tackling the rebuilding of this beast. This is a big book, needed a lot of repairs, which means we're going to have a very thick spine to deal with. When we took it apart, if you'll remember, it was a flat spine and it didn't have a hollow in it. The leather was glued right on to the same glue that held the pages together. We're going to do it a little differently. We're going to do a hollow spine on it and we're going to round it. But first things first, we need to punch some holes. We're reusing the old holes as much as possible, but because they were winding around threads that were embedded in the paper and we're going to use the ribbons on the spine, we need a couple of extra holes. I've ordered a sewing frame and I'm going to show you some of the other techniques, different bindings we can use for the books. But for this one, we're going to use the same one that we used on the Little Napoleon book. But we're going to do so on this big monster. When you're doing this, it's important to mark the head of your marker and to always have your sheets in so the head is lined up with the head on the marker. Otherwise, even a small difference in where these holes are can cause your nice, neat rows of holes to not be lined up. And it'll make your pages slightly shifted upward or downward, which means you have to cut more off. And in this case, I'm not going to cut any off this book. I have some new ideas for it. My original idea was to do something quite blocky, like the original, and maybe in a bright red leather with some nice gold design on it. As I got to working with it, however, it's got some damage and it's a bit rustic looking, but I like that. I like the edges on it. It looks like an old wizard's tome or something like that. And I decided the best way to honor its history is to leave a little bit of that patina, but to match the cover to the patina and the content of the book. So step one is getting nice, neat, inline sewing holes so that we can start the long job of sewing all this back together. Now we have somewhere between 250 and 300 signatures to sew here. I don't want to deal with a piece of thread that's 300 times as long as this book is tall. So I'll do about 12 to 15. It's a tall book, so 12 to 15 is still quite a lot of thread to deal with in one go. And I'll have to use the weaver's knots a few times through it. But really, it's the same process as you saw on the little book. We just need to repeat it. Get our needle threaded and then we stab right through the middle. This works really well even if you're doing other kinds of sewing, if your thread is big enough to handle your needle or your needle small enough, whichever way you want to think of it. Just pop it through like that, tighten it up a bit, and that'll smooth right down, nice and sleek. So we begin. It is always harder, frustrating, more finicky to do the first few signatures when it's really light. So I line up the hole first from the inside and then pull the needle through from the outside and get the first few bits of the thread through. I decided I'm going to use this quite rustic hessian ribbon. I'm only going to do 3 of them. I considered more, but of this ribbon, 3 is more than enough to hold this book together nice and solid. And in this case, I'm doing them about twice as long as the book is tall. A smaller book, they'd be longer than the book is tall, but we only need a few inches maybe 5 centimeters, 3 inches, something like that, of overhang on each side, called the tabs, the bit of the tape that hangs over. So we have ribbons that we call tape, and the overhanging end is tabs. If that's not confused you, then maybe you're a bookbinder. So we'll get these 3 tucked in on the first one. There's no weight to one signature. Once it gets sewn into 7 or 8, then there's something offering a bit of resistance. When it's this light, you pull the thread and the whole paper shifts around and moves. If you're using a sewing frame, it's a bit easier. If you're clipping it with a big metal clip, then that clip adds some weight. So I have the first signature down, and then I'm adding the second one. If you're wondering, by the way, the piece of folded paper, the set of folded paper that we call a signature, was originally called a quire. And the signature was a little bit of writing that was information given to the bookbinder or the printer. But it's just come to be known as the same thing. It's called synecdoche. Like if you say, I got a new pair of wheels, you don't mean just the wheels, you mean the whole car. So when we talk about a signature, we mean the whole quire. Spelled Quire. There we go, a nice tight knot. So our first few stitches are secure. Our tapes are relatively secure. We don't have much weight yet, but we'll fix that pretty quickly. As we go on, I'm checking if there are any little repairs that I missed that need to be done. With a book this big, this many signatures, sometimes I get into a bit of a zen state and I might miss things. My mind will wander and I'll just get into the physicality of what I'm doing, and I might not be looking at a place that maybe needs a bit of extra support. Now here we have enough signatures together that it has some heft. And when we bring the thread through, you can let go of the book and pull it, and the book doesn't slide all over the table. And we're about a quarter of the way through. So we'll do a nice little weaver's knot, make a loop, and then in this case we'll go in from the bottom, around the back, and then in through the top. As long as your thread is going in and out on the same layer, over the same layer of that strand, then you're good. You don't want it to go up from the bottom and then around and then up from the bottom again. On the next knot, I think it'll be a little easier to explain that. We have some thread too at the plantation library that's wax thread like this, but it's exceptionally slippery. It's really hard to get a knot in it that'll stay. And if that's the case, then knot it up and don't pull too very hard. Get to the end where your kettle stitch is, and once that kettle stitch is knotted up, it's locked in place waiting for the glue, and you'll be fine. So here, I'm not going to reef too hard on that. Just get it kind of snug, gently snug, and then complete this kettle stitch. Once I have that, big long piece of thread, we'll be all set. So I pull down toward the table, and then as it tightens, I pull up, cinches in there really nicely. And on we go. We've used a whole thing of thread. We have a little bit left and one signature left over. So let's do another weaver's knot. I think this is the fourth one of the book. I didn't include them all here because that is a lot of work that you're looking at there. So this one's from the other direction. So I'm going to just feed this through here so I don't have to do that once the knot is tied. I'd rather have the knot through it already. Trim this off, leaving as much as I can. Don't need a lot though. Make the little loop. Now this time I'll go in from the top, around, and then up from the bottom. So if you go in from the top, go out from the bottom. If you go in from the bottom, you go out through the top, and you'll see here on either side the threads are going in on top or on the bottom, but they're both doing the same thing. And we can move that knot over and then tighten it right up. You see it almost disappears. When I was pulling this book, taking it apart, I pulled 8 or 10 little weaver's knots out of there that have been holding for almost 300 years. Well, 250 years for this book, I suppose. So that was a bit of a rough threading, but I decided I'd just muscle it through. And a bit of a different colored thread. I don't think there are many people that will even see the threads on this book if they open up the signature in the center and see it. But of those, I don't think any will pay attention to a slight color change. So again, we'll do the nice little kettle stitch at the end. That'll lock that knot in place, take off the excess. Once we glue it, it'll be very secure again. We took a lot of glue off this book, if you remember. We're going to put a significant amount back in. Here's our last signature, our last quire. You can see how flexible it is with that tall, tall stack of signatures, each one having a little flex between them. It's just like a slinky. All of those added up little bits of flexion make it really wobbly. Which means if I were to try and do a straight back on this, I would have a frustrating job ahead of me. So I'm thinking of a way that might work a bit better, especially for the book to be readable, comfortably readable. So I'm at the end. I'm going to do a few more basically kettle stitches just to wind the thread up, poke it through, wind it up, poke it through, wind it up, and then when we glue that, it'll be nice and solid. And our sewing is done. Now you'll see what I mean here as I start to get rid of that swell by curving the back. You'll see that it gets lower and lower at the spine until it's almost matching the rest of the book. And off past the tips of my fingers, you see where it curves in. And we've got a nice, pleasant looking curl. The stitches are all lying next to each other in a uniform way. It feels more solid this way. So let's start looking at the structural covers. We'll have some fancier stuff to do on this book, but first we need good bones, good foundation. So we'll move you over there for a little bit. And we will cut the size of our cover boards. As before, we're going to have more than one layer of board. For this book, we'll have 3 layers. 2 that have the tapes pinched between them, the tabs pinched between them. And then we'll have another one on top that will help facilitate some of the decoration I plan for this book. Nice, careful cutting. Don't cut too hard. Take your time and you'll get a nice straight line. There we go. Now we need 6 of them. Through the magic of editing, there they are. Set those close to hand, because as we do some other building on the book, we'll need those for spacers and that kind of thing. Just double check that they fit all right, not just top to bottom, but side to side as well. Do we have a comfortable amount of overhang, both on the side and at the end? I think we do. It's going to sit right about there. Those tabs are too short. I left more than that. It's all on this side. So if you haven't sewn through your tapes, which you're not supposed to do, you can pull this up like that. A lot of friction in this one. There are a lot of threads across there. But I did not stab my tapes, so I'm able to adjust them to roughly the same on each side. And you'll see that's about 5 centimeters, 3 inches. A little more is okay. You don't want to do much less than that with a book this size because it is really heavy. It's some very dense, thick rag paper and 1,000 pages of it. So those will go like so. Because the leather will wrap in underneath it, we'll use those spacers there to have it placed in the right spot, and then pull the spacers out and put the leather on. But for now, I'm going to do something a bit unusual. I would normally vise this and glue it so that the glue doesn't fall down in between the signatures very much or seep down into the signatures. However, if you remember when this book was coming apart, the folds on the signatures were often quite ragged. And it is a book that's going to need a lot of help being held together. All those ragged edges are going to serve as surface area for this glue. So I'm actually okay with it seeping in some. I'll go right along. I'll cover the tapes as well, because once it's curved, those tapes don't need to move anymore. The tabs are the right length on both sides, so I can lock them in place. Nice liberal bit of glue, because it can sink right down in there and not be gluing pages together. And I'm only going to do the top part of that curve and then let it dry. So here we're dry. I'm going to flip this over so maybe 3/4 of that spine is not glued yet. It's just the bottom curve. So now I can match the top curve to the bottom, pull it out and just kind of get it nice and uniform, press in the sides, and we're ready to glue again. Those tapes are a little bit in the way, and I think this might be heavy enough to hold them down, keep them clear of the glue. So here we go again, getting all that kind of rough, ragged paper end and using what could be considered damage to our advantage. So not only have we sewn them together, but any imperfections on the edges of the paper will be glued in and act as little anchors. Don't be afraid when the glue's wet to adjust if you need to. Sometimes things get bumped or you just notice little imperfections. They will always be there, but minimize them if you can. It makes things easier later. And this time I'm going to glue all the way down to the spot where we were, taking care to line things up as I go. I don't want to run gallons and gallons of glue through, but I want to be quite liberal with it. On the second coat, I can put a lot thicker of a layer because it'll be sealed by this one. It won't be flowing down in between the pages. But that's good for now. In the new big vise, you can see a reasonably good curve. Nice solid sewing and glue. So now you can get serious. Get a nice thick layer on there, fill in those holes. That little bit of thread sticking up, we can trim that off. That's one of our weaver's knots. Sometimes they lay down, sometimes they stick up. If they stick up, just clip them off right at the base once the glue's on there and dry, and it won't hurt anything. So here we want some nice fiber running from side to side. So nice fibrous paper. We'll lay this down. This isn't Kozo paper. This is a thick watercolor style paper. Not too textured, this one, but it could be. It wouldn't be a problem. I notice as I'm doing this that I left a bit of a hollow in the spine there. So a dent right there where my fingers are pressing now, where that glue squishes out. I'll probably want to fill that in a little bit extra. A little later on, I'll layer on another area. Just down the center. But for now, I want the most surface area connection as possible. Squishing my fingers in there, getting the paper damp so it fits through all the little nooks and crannies on the book. And I'll do more than one layer. I want to build it up to the same height as those stitched layers that I've left bare there. The kettle stitches are covered over pretty easily. The other ones take a few layers. And then I do one end to end when I'm finished, so it looks like that. Now, let's turn our attention to the front while that spine gets good and dry. It's the back of the book actually, but it's the outside is what I meant by front. Now these were pressed underneath the book during the sewing and when we were pressing it flat before, and they weren't flat when they got pressed. So they are misbehaving. Tried to press them down in there. It kind of worked, but not really very well. But no worries. A little bit of masking tape will hold them in place. You don't even need to remove the tape. Just leave it in there, press it in with the book, and it will keep everything nice and snug. You don't want the tabs to be really sharply bent off to one side or the other, because part of their job is to take the pressure of the cover being lifted up or down, up toward the head of the book or down toward the tail. We want a strong band holding it in place. The leather over it will help support it as well. But as you can see here, it's just those three tabs really that are holding this thing. So they need to be strong and they need to be straight. Have a quick look, make sure that it's in place, that the overhangs are all even on the top, the bottom, and the side. Put an extra one here so that When we place the stone on top, it doesn't press against the spine. And down it goes. And we wait. Waiting done. This should be nice and dry. We're now on the front of the book doing the same thing. So I know that these tabs are going to be willful. So I throw a bit of glue down. It can start to get tacky. It does dry pretty quickly. This is archival PVA glue, so it's pH neutral. It dries quite quickly. Polyvinyl acetate, I believe it's called, PVA. So once that tape's down there, I'm getting the tabs nice and wet with glue. It adds weight and it also helps them to get maximum adhesion later on. I do a fairly generous layer of glue. You don't want the big white puddles like that, but you want some nice streaks of white there to make sure that it gets enough height that it sticks onto the board that's coming on. Just to be sure, give a layer on this board as well. Because the layers will add up, you don't need a really thick, juicy layer, just 2 medium ones. Bit of white showing. We line them up, and then when we press them together, when we push down once, little strands of glue will attach, even in places like around the ribbons where there might be a slight gap for a little bit, where the ribbons take up space. We press it down. You can cut little trenches for the ribbons, just little shallow depressions where the ribbons can go in and not take up any space between the slabs. But for 2 reasons I don't like to do that. One, the outside of this gray board is much stronger than the inside. The inside, if you remember from the carving video, is quite flaky. The outside's more like a sheet of paper and it will hold better. Once the leather's on and everything, you won't see if there's a slight gap on either side of the ribbons. And I've never seen where the ribbons show through on the cover. There we go. Front is dry, the back is dry. We have covers. Looks pretty good. They're nice and even. I like the feel of the book. I'm just going to measure around the spine. Why, you may ask? Because there's one step left to do in taming this beast, and that is putting on the basic spine. We're not going to do a bunch of decoration on it here. We'll just do the spine that fits around there that the leather will wrap around, and we will put some false bands on the outside of it. So this little square that I'm cutting now will be turned into false bands. And the long strip is going to be our spine, so I'll cut that here. As you may know from other videos, curving gray board can be disastrous. It can just split and come apart, and it gets really hard to deal with. But if you kind of gently coax it into a curve, it tends to stay together in my experience. So that's what I'm doing, just with a regular rolling pin here. The same thing you'd use to make cookies or pie crust or whatever. I use it to make spines. Generally wrap it around. It will spring back, so when I let go of this, it'll spring back and not be curved enough for this book. I want it to kind of naturally sit almost in as tight a curve as we need, almost that much curve. You want to get it nice and rounded, where it's happy to sit in a rounded way on its own. A little bit of opening up's not the end of the world, because we'll glue it and we'll anchor it down. You don't want too much curve either, or it might want to pop off of there, but that's pretty close. And now that we have it exactly on there, I can measure where each board is sitting in relation to it. And mark it rather than measure it. It's always nice to mark something and then you know where it fits. We'll trim off the extra. And then get to our bands. I didn't want them too wide, but I didn't want them to be so thin that they look like that twine method. I want this to look like it has proper leather bands. Even though these are false bands. Now you'll notice my warning on that little cardboard sheath. Caution, it's sharp. Normally it is wickedly sharp. I could tell when I started cutting here that we are overdue for sharpening, because it took way more pressure than it should to do that. But that said, it did make a nice cut. Next time I should have a nice sharpened Japanese cutting knife for you, pushing knife. Now I find it pleasing to the eye when I have a band like this to have one band's space between the top of the book and where the band sits, and the bottom and where the band sits. So I measure with the band. That's going to be the 5th band at the bottom. Then I just measure number 2 in the center, 3 in the center, sorry. And then between 1 and 3, I put a 2, and between 2 and 4, I put a 3. I bend the false bands in the same way that I bent the spine, except I can use my hand a little more because it's not so long. It has the little angled cuts from the Japanese pushing knife that will line up really well with the edges of the spine board that we cut, as you'll see in a moment. If you leave them flat at the ends, like a 90-degree, it won't look right. It won't look like a true band. It'll look like something fake pasted on. Whereas the way we've done this, it'll really fit with the curve of the book. It'll disappear into the curve of the book and look like the real deal, which is what we want. By the way, this has been done for hundreds of years. This isn't a modern way of trying to fake a look that they would have had 200 or 300 years ago. They were already putting false bands in a long time ago. Just because the way that we bind books changes over the decades and centuries. But you want to borrow from the gravity and the authority of older books. Part of the way to do that is through the cover. Make it look like an older book. Make it look like a Bible or a family tree or a law book. And it has more gravitas. So there we go. That's what our spine is going to look like. With a few embellishments, but that's the basics. And again, lots of clips. Took 10 clips for that. It's nice to have lots of clips around. One more thing left in putting this book back together before we get to the fancy stuff. And that is our hollow. We don't want our signatures to take the strain and the weight of the book opening up each time. So we'll share that out by putting a hollow in so the spine of the book can lift backward away from the ends of the signatures. It's easier on the spine of the book. It doesn't get that crease down it that you'll see in some of our books, where the leather was glued right to the book and then eventually it just split in the middle. The leather got brittle over the years and couldn't take it. This will save the leather, give it many more years. So we have that hollow bit in between. When I press this down, it's basically like making a flattened tube. There's no glue. on the inside, so I could open this up like a toilet paper or paper towel tube. And that's what we want. We want it to be able to open up when the book moves and flexes. So center it. Doesn't go to either end, you'll notice, because we'll be folding over our leather into place. We want it to be mushed right down so it doesn't open up. And we don't have it in the press tied down because this book is too big for that press. Just put little pieces of tape on that we can pull off later. Over it goes, feeling nice and solid. The beast has been tamed. The next video will be all about the beauty.